also say a quick thank you to my awesome sponsors that allow me to talk about whatever I want to talk about. So thank you to Crest and Cervi for making Sincerely Carolina possible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so I'm going to let my guests introduce themselves. I am Carolina, and I am the host of this show. All right, so we have Veer and Bruce in house. Hello, Veer. Hello, Bruce.
Hello.
All right, so I didn't really hear you guys, so can we try that one more time?
Hello.
Okay, yes, yes, buen dia.
Buen dia.
I feel like a teacher sometimes in class, and then you're like I don't hear you awake yet, you know? All right, so Veer, Bruce, I don't know who wants to go first. Can you please quickly introduce, or not quickly, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here today?
Okay, I guess I'll start. Good morning. Happy Pride to everyone, all the listeners. My name is Bruce Ponson. I am the president of Fundacion Orguyo Aruba. We're a foundation that was started in 2019 with a specific goal to fight for equal rights for the LGBTQI plus community specifically in Aruba. We had a few cases against the government, which we have won. One of the biggest moments was December of last year, in which the opening of the marriage was accomplished basically through the courts. Unfortunately, the government of Aruba decided no, it's not what they would want to accept, and appealed the said case to the Hoge Raad. But that is a little legal background. So we're here celebrating Pride Month, and Sincerely Carolina is hosting a day specifically for the transitioning of transgenders and of members of our community. And let me just state, historically, the transgender community has always been the most victimized members of the community. And I have to say, if it wasn't for them 53 years ago, that decided, specifically the transgender community decided this is enough, we are going to stand up for our rights, which started the Stonewall riots in New York. Thanks to them, we are celebrating Pride and not marching for our rights. Most places in the world, not everywhere in the world, have some type of rights and protection for the community. But the original activist and advocacy was the transgender community. So happy Pride and thank you. The T of the letters.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Bruce. I think that was a nice introduction, you know, giving us a little like legal snippet locally, but also understanding a little bit about why it's important to also give space to have a conversation about transgender people, and you know, as being part of the community and what role they played in actually, you know, having a Pride Month and actually having a conversation around rights. Because I don't want to say having rights because we're not fully there yet, but having a conversation on rights in the first place. So Bruce, thank you for that intro. Veer is not new to Sincerely Carolina, but for those of you that don't know you, Veer, can you introduce yourself for us?
Yes, my name is Veer. I'm 25 years old and I identify as a transgender guy. So I'm very excited to be here. Me and Carolina go way back. So
yes, we do.
Very excited to talk about some trans issues, a little bit more about transitioning, give my sort of personal side of the story. And yeah, excited to see where the conversation goes today.
Yes, indeed. So I think our first conversation was somewhere about like almost 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
So I do think that it's nice to like touch base again and like have a conversation on these topics again. And you are now on the island,
yes.
So that makes a difference as well.
Officially.
Because then I can ask you more often about like, you know, coming in, but just having conversations and like having, you know, more activities on a systematic way for our island. All right, so maybe we should start with like a little basics for the sake of basics, right? Because some people might still not fully understand what it is when somebody identifies as transgender and how that differs from sexual attraction. And I think it is important to have that conversation real quick, or you know, to go over that real quick, just so maybe people understand the difference. So Veer, Bruce, I don't know, whichever of you feels like you want to start, and then we'll all chime in as we go.
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and then if I missed anything, you guys feel free.
Awesome.
But I feel like the biggest parts that people kind of get confused about is what is the difference between a trans man and a trans woman? Like, what exactly does that mean? So trans man essentially means that you identify as a man. So regardless of what gender you, like if you were born as female, and then you identify as male, you would be a transgender man, like me, for example. And then the same goes for a transgender woman. If you're born and you're assigned male at birth, and then you say you identify as a female, then you are a trans woman. So that's the first important thing to remember. And then I think the second big thing is the difference between gender and sexuality. So gender is something you feel on the inside. It's inherent. It's part of your identity. It has nothing to do with your genitalia, with your chromosomes, with anything that you were kind of assigned at birth. It can be the way you express yourself, the way you identify, the things you wear, the kind of name you have. All this kind of relates to your gender. And then you have your sexuality, which is more related to who you're sexually attracted to, who you're romantically attracted to, or not attracted to. And those two things are very separate. So like me, for example, I'm a trans man. That's my identity. And then my sexuality is that I'm straight because I like women. So yeah, it can be different for everyone.
Yes. Bruce, I don't know if you want to chime in before I go ahead and...
No.
Okay.
I think he covered it all.
Yes, indeed. And, I think it is important because I think that people have this idea that it is something that you just like decide, and it's tied to maybe like sexual attraction. As to, for example, your gender expression is usually something that you do choose and you develop, with time. But the other two things are very inherent, like they are in you, and usually they are clear at a young age. It's just that people are not necessarily equipped to identify what it is that you're feeling or somebody is expressing. So I do think that it is important just to say that it's not that somebody wakes up today and is like, today I feel like I want to switch,
Yeah.
Because that is how it is being portrayed in media sometimes, and the idea that it could be something that you can impose on someone or that you can like convince somebody to do, but these are very inherent things. They're part of who you are and like your characteristics, and not something that changes because there's like a media trend or whatever. So I do want to say that for the sake of like correct information and education, but it's also not a process of like, okay, I am feeling this and I'm just gonna go shop for hormones and surgery and whatever, and I am done. It is a process, and the process looks differently in different places and for different people, of course, but this is a reality for Aruba as well, that this is not something that is new or that is foreign to Aruba. Transitioning happens in Aruba, and we have a very well lined out system of doing it because it is tied to medical guidelines. So it's also not something that is done in a way that would be considered unprofessional or not irresponsible, that would be the word. So Bruce, yesterday we learned a lot on these little things. So but we also know that it's not where we necessarily would want it to be for it to be truly accessible. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about our Aruba situation in regards to that.
Well, the specific situation in Aruba, I think Veer is much more informed than I could ever be. But I was mentioning it to Veer, and we were talking about it after the presentations last night at Casa Cultura. I'm a little older than the other guests and the presenter today. I do remember growing up, and the previous generation just before me, it was very difficult, and not only because the medical facility or expertise was lacking, it was because we are such a small society, and in order for someone to change their identity, it was very difficult because you grew up either a girl or a guy, and then you notice that you're different, and you want to live your authentic self. And during that process, everybody around you, from your family, your friends, and even society in general, has a role to play in order for it to become reality. And it was very difficult being in a macho culture. Most of them had to immigrate, leave the island, and live somewhere else, Europe, the States, Latin America, in order for their direct society, I will call it, so their circle of contacts, let's call it that, because it's not only friends and family, in order for that circle to accept them for who they really are.
Mm-hmm.
And on the island, it was always difficult because people that knew you from before will keep referring you to your former name
Yep.
and identify you as your former gender. And that is something very difficult. And I told Veer last night, I'm very glad to hear that the medical community is very supportive and the facilities are there to help psychologically, physically, etc. But I think more and more the information is needed in order for the society of Aruba to understand what's the difference and what needs to change. Because in reality, it does not affect them. It's just a perception that they have, and they need to respect each and everyone's identity. That's basically it.
I do think that is a good point where I do want to elaborate a little bit more on. It's the idea that by adjusting how you address somebody, by acknowledging that you need to address that you need to respect what somebody is telling you, that they want to be called, what their pronouns are now, what their new name is, for example, is usually met with resistance because I understand, how our brain works, and I understand that it is rewiring. It's like you have learned, for example, how to bike, and then all of a sudden you need to learn how to bike all over again in a different way. But it does take practice. It's muscle memory. It is something that you need to just work on reshaping and rewiring. However, that resistance, because there isn't maybe enough information or knowledge on the impacts of the importance of that, people, tend to take I'm afraid to use the word lazy, but for lack of a better word, they become lazy because they're like, oh, this is gonna take too much work for me to relearn and rewire and whatever. And also, why are you so sensitive about it? And this is who we were for so long, and now we have to change, and this is whatever. Just I'm just gonna do mistakes, and you have to be okay with that. And I think that we don't talk enough about what it is for the person on the receiving end when you do not make the effort to respect them for who they are. So Veer, maybe you can elaborate a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about why also support systems are important within that context.
Yeah, I have a lot to say. So it's funny that you mentioned a lot of people feeling the need to leave Aruba to transition, because I guess me similarly, when I was about 13, I left the island. Not only for the reason to feel safe to come out and transition and all this stuff. At the time, I didn't even know I was transgender, but that was one of the big reasons I left, is because I had been outed as gay at the time, and I didn't feel comfortable anymore. And at the same time, I wanted to experience life in the U.S. and go to school there. So I ended up leaving for about 10 years. Recently moved back, but during that time is when I actually transitioned, started taking testosterone, went through my social and medical transition. So by the time I came back to Aruba, I had been removed from this island for about 10 years, and then I came back looking completely different with a different name, all this stuff. And I think not just people in Aruba, but people in general, we go very much off of assumptions and perceptions and what we see. And so sometimes with trans people, especially if they're going through their transition, or if they choose not to medically transition, it can be very hard for people to connect what they identify as and their pronouns with how they look. And I think that's very difficult for people, and that's where the mess up kind of happens, where they might assume that this person is a she, but actually the person identifies as a he, or the other way around. But for somehow when you come back and you have a beard and a deep voice and all this stuff, and you look like the gender you're supposed to, then it's a lot easier to be it connects in the brain somehow. So I absolutely agree that more education is needed, and just basic, simple human respect. If someone is telling you how they identify and what they want to be called, just have some respect for that, and try to, I understand you cannot switch right away, but at least try to, give them the respect that they deserve. On the other side, though, I agree with you, Carolina. I think people can be very sensitive. And I don't think we can expect everyone to automatically understand right away what it is to be transgender, how to use pronouns, because it is difficult and it is something we're not used to as a society, because not all of us were brought up that way or taught this from a young age. It does take some getting used to. So I think just having patience and respect all around on both sides is super important.
I think that's a nice thing, that you're saying, and you go through stuff and then you learn, right?
Yeah.
And it is indeed being patient for everyone. So I have also, as an advocate, sometimes I tend to detach myself from emotional things sometimes, or how it might emotionally impact someone on both sides. And I tend to be a lot black and white, if somebody is telling you these are the pronouns, you just have to do it. And and I get a little defensive because I feel like in my brain it's you just need to learn it and do the work to learn it, and but then having more conversations with people and generally being open to understanding that it is a process for everyone, and that is what you want. You want people to go through this process together, because then they will eventually become advocates as well, and they will educate other people. But if they are met with immediate resistance, or if they are met with immediate cancellation, basically, right? Then chances are they will not learn, and they will not be open to learn either. And I think that we should start these conversations more often with stating that it is coming from a point of respect to the person standing in front of you, and that every single person, no matter who they are, what they do for a living, and what choices they made in life, they deserve basic respect. And we need to work a little bit on that, because we have, as a society, tended to add it or taken away value from people depending on their choices, or depending on how they live their life, etc. And the truth is that as a society, the LGBTQIA plus community has been marginalized, so it automatically has a prejudice to it. So I think it is important to remind people that they are human first, and therefore you should respect them regardless.
I think you mentioned the golden rule of etiquette and communication. Respect it should always be where you're coming from in any dialogue and any communication whatsoever. And the rule, I think it's don't do unto others what you don't want to be done on yourself. I do think that the pronouns have. It's an issue that I and the board of Orguyo have also discussed quite frequently, and I think it has a source, because my main language is Papiamento. I grew up speaking Papiamento, and Papiamento is a gender-neutral language.
Yeah.
There is no differentiation between a female and a male. And then you acquire English, Dutch, Spanish, which do have that distinction. I think what is really necessary, and maybe again it has a generational origin, but pronouns didn't used to matter as much, because for the LGBT community, the he, she was a variable, like you mentioned before, because gender expression is completely different than the gender identity. And you have the days, I'm speaking for myself, you have days that you feel a little bit more feminine, a little bit more male, and then the pronouns are not that important.
Yeah.
But that is for me specifically. I don't mind, jokingly someone says she, or it's playful in that sense. But when you're talking about the transgender community, when they're trying to change their identity, it becomes a bigger issue, much more important, because they want to be recognized and identified for the gender that they are, and feel like they should get that respect. And once that is communicated and understood by anybody you're communicating with or have contact with, it's going to be respected, and accepted.
For
hopefully.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's one conversation at a time where we educate and we share these things. But I was talking about this with my siblings, with my sisters in any case, and and we were talking about that specifically, how for example pagamento, it's not that much of an emphasis, but in English, for example, it is, because it is a pronoun. In Spanish, even the variations of it are again a little bit less clear or forward as they are in English, for example. So we were talking a little bit about that, and indeed how language also shapes our brain and how we think about things. And I started thinking about okay, so in this case particularly, we're talking about pronouns, right? But if you think about name calling in general, we introduce ourselves with a name, and some people love their names and some people don't, because we don't pick our names. So sometimes people will introduce themselves with a shortened version, and you'll have people who will insist on using, for example, whatever your given name was, although you choose not to go by that name because you don't like it, you're identified with it, or even worse, maybe it's tied to a traumatic something. And then I was like, maybe that is an easier way for people to understand the impact of if you continuously choose not to listen to a person who is telling you, I don't like to be called that. And we're not even talking about slurs or something like that, because when we talk about name calling, it can also be on a bullying level where you very awarely and you do it on purpose, choose to call somebody a name, or wrongly in this case, to annoy them and to hurt them. But even if they're not coming from a bad place, but it's just a lack of empathy and choosing not to put yourself in maybe oh my gosh, I need to remember not to call the person that name, but use the name or the way that they have asked me to call them. And then that kind of had an moment, and then they joked about it, and they're like, Karina, should we reintroduce ourselves? And I'm like, y'all laugh about it, but I have a thing with my name shortened. I don't like for random people to use it, and I feel very confident telling people that too. They'll be like, Caro, baba, and I'm like, it's Carolina, But it's I have become aware with that, and I'm like, just when I do that, and people tend to respect that, and then next time they'll address me, and I'm like, why is it different when somebody is telling you are using the wrong pronouns, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why is it then that you're gonna add extra resistance? Is it because you inherently feel that that is something you do not want to participate in, or you do not want to comply
This
in?
reminds me of another good example that I've heard that just kind of it sounds funny, but it makes sense if you think about it. Is that if you're walking on the street and you see someone walking their dog, and you go up to pet the dog and you're like, oh my god, he's so cute, what a nice dog. And then the person's like, oh no, it's a she. Immediately you're like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, what a cute girl, dog, she's so cute, and you correct yourself immediately, even though gender doesn't even matter to a dog.
Yep.
But with humans, there's such a resistance, and I don't know where it comes from.
That is an awesome example, because indeed, I think because I have created this in my brain where I try to be super aware and stuff. I go up to dogs and I'm like, that's a cute dog. What's its name? And then they'll say a name, and then I'm like, and then sometimes, with pets, they'll be weird names. So I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'll try to look. But if it's, if it's a spade or neuter or whatever, then sometimes there are no signs. And then I'm like, we're just going to call the dog by its name because we don't know. And also it doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't matter, yeah.
So, and then we adjust and it's fine. However, like you said, then when somebody does it, there's a resistance.
And to mention that, you're respecting the owner of the dog. Your dog doesn't even know what's going on.
Exactly.
So it's for respect of the owners of someone else. And then for humans, there's no respect.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, dogs are more important, but
well, I mean, no, but that is a good way indeed to see how we are indeed capable of, respecting, in this case, the owner enough to correct ourselves and to adjust. But yeah, so all of these things come with even more questions and even more what do I do now? And the truth is that as people, we will have questions about everything always. But for some people, that having some of these questions could mean, going into down spiral for their mental health. It could mean, maybe even deciding, that they don't want to participate in life anymore, because they still do not understand their own situation, let alone having a conversation with somebody else about the situation. So, I said that we were going to talk a little bit about support systems as well. But what does that look like? Because I think when we talk about support systems, people usually think about like having something systematic like a support group, which is important, and we'll talk about that, or having like super supportive, I stand behind you at all times parents, which is great, but support systems don't necessarily always look like either of those two things, right? So what is support? And in the case of like, the trans community, but the LGBTQIA plus community in general, what does support look like? And Bruce, I'm looking at you. Feel free to chime in, but Veer as well. What does support look like, and how can we as members of the community of Aruba, as an island nation, be part of a support system of somebody or the whole community?
I think the expert on this would be Veer. I assume everybody would need a different support system depending on where they're at, and what a personal, if they're an introvert, extrovert, if they need outside confirmation, comfort, whatever any person would need. So maybe you could tell a little bit about your experience and how your support came about.
Yeah, I think it's not even just talking about the queer community, but everyone needs support, right? You need someone you trust, you can go to, who you can vent to, talk to stuff about. I think it's a little unique with the queer community though, because often the things you need support for, you can feel very, like especially in the beginning of your coming out journey, you can feel very alone. Maybe you don't know anyone else who identifies. So it's a bit harder to find that support system. I think a lot of people first find it with friends because they feel more comfortable to talk to their friends. There's no fear of that rejection or being kicked out of the house or no longer being accepted or loved, things like that. It's a little more open, a little easier with your friend group. And that's where I found my support system at first as well. When I was first coming out, I told my friends first, kind of dealt with it and dealt with the whole acceptance process with them, and then eventually got the courage to come out to my parents, the rest of my family, the rest of the community. But yeah, again, I think like Bruce said, it's different for everyone and it's different based on what your needs are. I mean, you have the social support groups, then you have your legal support groups that help. This is a big part of what you're working on that maybe you want to talk about it, help you kind of get to a place in your life where you feel you can actually live the life that you want to live. You have medical support groups that give you the hormones you need or the surgeries you need, or even the mental therapy that you need. I think there's so many different kinds, and it really is just based on the person and what you're going through.
I know you started a support group for the trans and non-binary community.
Yes, I did.
I think it's a
for the
great,
plug.
Yes.
it's just a great initiative.
Yeah, so for me, again, I really struggled with support groups, and even when I did find them, I still didn't really have any trans friends or trans support groups where I felt like people would be very supportive of me, very respectful, very empathetic towards what I was going through, but I've never been in a situation where I would tell someone what I was going through and they would be like, I know what that feels like. And I really wanted that. I wanted to be able to have someone I could relate to, who could relate to me and really understand what I was going through. And I think a lot of people want that. So I thought it was really important to start a group where people could just come together and have a safe space to, whether they're non-binary or transgender or just kind of questioning, trying to figure out their gender. Just come together, talk about it, and be able to relate to each other and feel for 2 hours once a month that they're heard.
Yes. And you mentioned in how complex a support system can be, right? All the way from friends and family to medical professionals. And I do think that it's important that we consider that, because that means that the person who is going through this process is dealing with a lot at the same time, and that alone hopefully triggers an emotion of empathy or sympathy to the fact that it is something big that is happening in somebody's life, and that you provide a safe space for that. Even when you have no idea what it is to personally go through that, even if you cannot relate on a personal level as to what you're explaining or what you're going through, but just giving the space for that to happen and to be supportive through that. So I think it is also important to talk maybe a little bit in the specific situation of trans people going through, labeling maybe themselves different things throughout their lifetime, and how that in itself also can cause irritation maybe in people. Although we are not responsible or of somebody else's emotions, I always tell people that, like, you made me feel this way, and I'm like, no, you're feeling that way, and I would like to know what I maybe said that triggered that, but I'm not making you feel anything, something happening in your brain. But I do think it is important to talk about that, because I think that we as a society are hyper fixated on labels and are obsessed with labels. Like, that's the right word. We're obsessed with labels, and we want to label things so that we can put it in a little box and like pretend that means we know everything and understand everything about that little box, right? So Veer, maybe you can explain, and Bruce as well, just as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, that how labels in itself in our society, obsessing about labels, can make somebody's process even more, lengthy or even more strenuous, really, because you're struggling to grasp onto something. Meanwhile, everybody's process is different.
Yeah. I totally hear you with the label thing. I think a lot of people don't like to confine themselves to labels and put themselves in that box. For me, though, honestly, it's a little different. I found the labels super helpful. Before I transitioned, before I realized I was transgender, I didn't have the vocabulary to be able to express how I felt or how I identified. And for me, once I learned about the label and what it meant, it kind of opened a door for me to be able to be like, okay, that's what I am. There's a word for it. There's a way to describe it. But before that, I was literally just grasping for straws, trying to do it. But having the definition literally given to me, and yes, of course, there are people who don't identify completely with that definition per se. I sometimes myself find that, it is a box, and I don't like to be confined to it. But it does help to have a rough idea to be like, okay, yes, this is the foundation. This is the basic definition. And then now I have something I can build on and at least educate other people with to help explain how I identify or how I see myself. Right.
And that is the thing. I think that's the purpose, right? Or I hope it is. The purpose of these labels are for the person who is going to use them. But I think it's more the hyperfixation of the people outside to have answers from people. So like in your case, right? You didn't know. So you were trying to grasp whatever, and what usually happens, because I have heard it with the youth, for example, is like they immediately like try to give it something. Oh, so you like girls, so you're a lesbian now? And meanwhile, that's not necessarily how they identify, but you feel pressured now because, it's like I have to make a choice now. Like I have to decide now. And what happens is that, and I hear it, and I think it's important to educate people, is like, yeah, but I mean, yesterday they were this, and then today they're this, and then tomorrow, and look at him now, he's wearing dresses now. Like, I thought he was just gay, or something like that. And I think it is important to talk about how that process is a person's process. And indeed, like you said, the labels can be helpful to them, but they're not something for us to weaponize.
And I think labels are important in the sense, but I think the boxing is the issue.
Yes.
Because we recently had a conversation. A group of kids reached out to Fundacion Orguyo. They wanted a chat. It wasn't kids, they were teenagers, and I think the parents could communicate with us. And there was two girls, they wanted to understand the different letters. And it was mentioned last night, it started with the LGB, then it became the T, and now we have all the letters that come after. And they didn't understand the difference. During the entire conversation we had, it came out that they had a friend who was, I think he was either coming out as gay or dealing with his sexual identity. We couldn't get the details because they were young kids, so they had a lot of questions. And Fundacion Orguyo has a small pamphlet brochure with an explanation about all the letters.
Okay.
But even if you identify, we had a discussion with one of the board members, why do you limit yourself or box yourself within that one letter? And I mean, our basic principle, we are humans first and everything comes after. So we mentioned it before, the sense of respect. You know, even marriage equality, which is what we're fighting for, I wouldn't say unfortunately, but destiny has made it so that the battle is being fought on marriage equality, but marriage has nothing to do with it. We want legal recognition for the human being, whatever it is. If you identify sexually attraction as a lesbian, as a gay person, or your sexual identity as a transgender, you deserve equal protection under the law. Doesn't matter if you're a woman, doesn't matter if you're a man. No, it does not. You're a human being first and foremost, and everything that comes after is part of you, and society should be accepting. But the legality of recognition is something that we have always stated that is first and foremost, because we've been talking a lot about social acceptance and social, support. But if your own country where you're living does not recognize you legally as a human being and the identity you are, your authentic self, then it's difficult to get society on board.
Yep.
And that is something I would really like to hear Veer's experience on the matter. How did the legal change of name come about? Because yesterday, someone came up and asked me, because she was busy transitioning as well, and she has come across obstacles. And I know these exist in Aruba, and they're very difficult. I think, and Ahmar, our secretary, mentioned it during his presentation last night. That is the next battleground, I think, after we achieve equality under the law for marriage and all the social protections and obligations that come with it. The transgender community does not have access to recognition.
This is a tough one. For me, actually, the name change part was easy because luckily I have dual citizenship, so I have a U.S. and a Dutch passport. So while I was living abroad in the U.S., it's like literally a one document you sign. You put what you want your new name to be. You get a doctor to sign off on it, saying that yes, this person is struggling with their gender identity, and having this new name would help them live a better life, something along those lines. And then you get a court date. The judge agrees, you get a stamp, and that's it. Your name is legally changed. And then it changes in your U.S. passport immediately, and the Dutch passport has to respect it as well. If you have the court decree and everything, I just sent that in, and immediately my name changed. But the gender change for me has been the real issue. In the U.S., again, it's super easy. You literally just get like a psychologist's letter. As soon as the passport office sees it, they're forced to legally change your gender.
Okay.
But with in Aruba, so I was born in St. Thomas. That's how I got my U.S. passport. And with Dutch passport, you need to have all this other criteria. And I think it's a lot easier if you're born in Aruba. Then the loops are easier to jump through. But for me, I had to have it changed on my birth certificate for the Dutch government to be able to be like, okay, yes, you are male now. We can change it in your passport. So I called St. Thomas and I was like, look, I was born here. I need to change my gender marker. And they were like, yeah, sorry, we don't do that. We've never done that. You are like the first person to ask for this, apparently.
Wow.
So they were like, we literally have no law that would even allow us to change your gender marker. We have no idea how to go about it. So it would take like a good 5 years to even set this into motion. I was like, I don't have 5 years. Like I literally don't have a Dutch passport to use right now because it still had my old picture and my old gender. And I was using it in the beginning, and then it got to a point where like I literally am standing in the airport with my beard and my short hair, and I'm like, yeah, that's me. And they're like, what the hell? Like, no, it's not you. So it was starting to be a bit of an issue. So I was like, I need this changed. And then I consulted a lawyer here in Aruba who's been like amazing, super helpful. But basically, it ended up being this huge process where I literally had to fly to Holland, make an appointment to meet with a psychologist there, do a whole interview with her, have her basically prove that yes, this guy is transgender, he is who he says he is, sign off on paperwork. Then I had to re-register in DMAS because now all my documents are and like a year and a half later, I'm still fighting this. And literally last week, I just got my paperwork back from DMAS saying that yes, you are Veer now and you are male, and now you can go reapply to be in the census and get your passport. So I've literally been like Dutch passportless for the last year and a half because it's been such a process to have this change, and it's been like super triggering and super stressful. So yeah, getting the whole legal change done is tough, and we definitely need a better way to go about
But you
that.
achieved it. Congrats.
Finally, yes, I'm finally there.
Like I am a little like speechless only because I work in policy, right? The truth is that as a policy advisor, half of the time we are figuring stuff out the moment a question comes to us. Like we don't even think about stuff. I mean, we do not have giant brains and think about everything at all times. Sometimes you'll have a question in front of you, and then we sit in a team meeting and we're like, yeah, nobody thought about this, right? And in my case, it's in healthcare, and usually it happens when something happens, and then you need to figure it out. In your case, somebody comes with a question, and now you have to figure it out. But that's the thing, right? Then what happens is, especially in our small island communities, is that you are trying to put out a fire then because the situation is already in there. We did not prepare for it. So that's where education is important, because it is a reality, and because, for example, we know that in Aruba, medical transitioning is possible. So, are other departments that should be made aware of this? The reality is that we do not necessarily work in a form of communication where we sometimes aren't even aware who should be advised or informed. So it is good that we have these type of conversations, and there are foundations that work a little bit more on the legal aspect to actually have situations where a problem can be presented, and then that question can be asked in a way that triggers processes to be developed. Because the reality is that even if nobody necessarily comes asking for it, it is a possibility. So are we prepared for those things, yes or no? And what we heard from right now is that chances are that it's not fully worked out yet.
Yeah.
Right? How is it like, and we don't have to say names or anything, but how is it like for the people working throughout this process with you? And I am, you said it was very triggering, but I'm assuming you were patient throughout the process, obviously. But what was it like? I mean, on that education process, did you feel like it was something that we lack basic knowledge on, or you feel like people were a little bit more like, oh yes, we need to do something about it?
Yeah, I think it's a big question, because we obviously do need to do something about it, and I think a lot of the people that I was working with through this process knew that, but it's a lot bigger than them. It takes a lot of change, and it really has to start from the top or from the root. And I mean, there were so many aspects to my situation that made it very unique. Like, I was born outside of Aruba, I have the dual citizenship, just so much that had to get figured out. Whereas if I was born in Aruba and then could change my birth certificate, it would have been a lot easier process. But there were so many things that made it so difficult, and everyone was there just trying to figure it out. I think more than anything, I just appreciated that my lawyer who was working with me could have given up at any point and been like, this is impossible.
This is too complicated.
Too complicated.
Bye.
I'm sorry. I do not want to sign up for this. But she and her team were so supportive, really helped me through it. Literally did so much research to try and figure out how we could get to this point that we're at now. So I forget your original question. But
no, I mean, in the process of going through these things, right, I think it's important, because yesterday somebody said something in the talks that Aruba as a country, for example, is very progressive on a lot of fronts, and our people generally, compared to maybe some other islands, tend to have a more progressive mind, but like you said, it is bigger than them. So did you feel like we are at a point like we are lacking more systematic solutions
Yeah.
rather than maybe the
Look,
people working?
I will say this. Yes, we are lacking systematic solutions. We are lacking medical solutions, legal solutions. But I would much rather be living in a place where people are more open-minded, more curious, more willing to learn. Because that's what I've seen in Aruba. Because from there, then you know at least you have the foundation to get to that point. Whereas I was living somewhere like the States where, yeah, it's super easy to change your name and your gender and your passport, and there's all these resources to transition. But if you really look at the people who live there, there is so much hatred and so much negativity and closed-mindedness. And now there's so many people, the people who feel this way about the community are trying to ban trans healthcare, are trying to do all these things to make it harder for people to really live the way they want to live. I would much rather be in a place like Aruba than in a place like the US right now.
That is a
So I'll
nice
leave it at
thing.
that.
I think that's a very important, because most of the time a lot of people criticize the small island community because it has a lot of negative consequences, effects, whatever. One of the great things, I think, to quote, I think Gloria Steinem always said, hate generalizes, but love exemplifies or is personal. And I think in a small community, the information you were mentioning, it's much more important and easier
Yeah.
to convey, because if the information reaches the correct target group, they can bring about change more
Yeah.
easily. If they know the person and the struggles this person is facing, they're going to support and try to help the problem at hand. In that sense, I think lobbying is very important. We have 21 members of parliament. Thankfully, because it's a small island, they're very accessible. It's not like the U.S.
They're
Congress
super far
or
away.
Yeah.
the Tweede Kamer
True.
in Holland. And I think that is something necessary, because once someone understands where you're coming from, what are your struggles, and I cannot imagine a person willing to work for the community. I'm talking specifically about representatives in parliament, politicians. Their job is to represent the community, and if one member of the community does not feel accepted or supported, there's empathy, right?
Yeah.
I believe it's impossible not to be human, or to be human and not to tone empathy. If it starts with empathy, they're gonna start tolerating because they accept and know the struggles, and that would hopefully lead to acceptance and ultimately to support,
Yep.
bring about change, whatever is needed. In your case, like we mentioned, the legal recognition, a simple change of your gender, it's not going to cost them anything. It's not going to affect their lives, but it will affect yours.
Yeah.
And if they can understand that, why wouldn't you lend a helping hand? So, and in the States, you're talking about 300 million U.S. citizens that need to support you to bring about change. Well, it's not that much, but it's a lot more than the 100 plus something thousand that we have here.
Yeah.
And even the voters are much less than that. So
Yes.
it's a smaller community,
Yeah.
but the change should be able to be brought about more easily in the sense, and then the information is key, because they need to understand what's going on and
I agree.
what they can do to support.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you say. At the end of the day, Aruba is just like a small community, and it makes it a lot easier for you to get your story out, for you to educate people. So, yeah, I mean, that's part of what we do. We keep going out there, sharing our
Yes.
stories, sharing the information, hoping that the right person will hear it, and yeah, eventually it'll create change.
And I really like talking, in cultural context as well, and I do that often. And there's a lot of pros and cons to any cultural system, and we live in times where people as themselves are much more individualistic. We care about ourselves, etc., and what we need. But culture tells us how our community works. And Aruba, the Caribbean in general, we are living in collectivist cultures. We care about each other, we look out for each other, and we carry the burden, but also the happiness and pride of each other, right? And because Aruba has been relatively, open and progressive as an island, it indeed makes it easier to have these conversations, and for us to carry as well, I don't want to say burden, but the responsibility to make it better and make it right. And I do think that I see that more often than not even when somebody does not understand the letters or does not like in any way understand how or why or when something happens, but they will be like, okay, this is an issue. And it is not again about like, oh, because you're a trans man, but it's because Veer is going through this. So that is a beautiful thing that we indeed have as an island, and that we need to tap into it a little bit more, you know, refocusing on that essence of the way our community functions, our you know, collectivist culture functions, that it is not because I am part of this group and that's why you should care, but because I am this person, I am your neighbor, I am your family, I am your friend, you know, and this is happening to me, and you know, you have forms of making it better. Can we talk about it? So I do think we should focus a little bit more on listening to the person in front of you for the person that they are. Yeah, definitely. And indeed, in larger countries, that is like almost impossible to get to the people that can make change happen, right? So.
And they have brought about change. That's even more respectful. Because
yes.
It doesn't matter how big the country is. I mean, European countries and the United States, a lot has changed within the last decade alone. Yeah. So it is possible, and it should be possible and easier in Aruba. In that context.
Exactly. In that context, that means that, you know, there isn't just hope because it's happening over there, but because we don't have to invent a wheel. Now I always tell people, I'm super against inventing a new wheel. I'm like, let's just find a wheel that sort of kind of fits, and we will make whatever adaptations are needed and make it fit, you know, because that is important. People have fought a bunch of fights already, and it is finding what that means for us in our community and making that work. I'm looking at the time, so we need to kind of like wrap it up in a little bit. But what are things that you feel that people really need to know or hear that, you know, you want them to know and hear?
Do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Oh, I have to think a bit. Just in general to everything we spoke about?
Yeah.
Bruce, you want to go first?
Well, let me start by saying it's Pride Month. It's a month in which we try to celebrate humanity in general and all of the letters we have spoken about specifically. And I think out of our conversation today, what is really needed for everyone to understand is respect. Even if you do not agree with me, you do not understand the issue, I think starting out of respect will help a lot. If you do not want to participate in the Pride celebration, that is your right. There's no obligation to do so, but do respect others that need that moment of expression, acceptance, community, and if society in general can respect that enough, I think that is a good way to start. So my message to everyone would be respect, patience, and we're gonna get there eventually. I'm sure of it. It's just gonna take some time.
That was really well said.
Yes.
I guess if I could leave everyone listening with anything, it would be that, you know, just keep being yourself, keep living your truth, keep fighting your fight. 100% agree with Bruce. Eventually we will get there. Eventually things do get better, even if it might seem really tough right now. I think we are already going in the right direction. It might take a little time, but as long as you surround yourself with the people who love you and support you, and you make sure that you're doing everything you can to keep yourself happy, eventually, yeah, we will get there.
Yes, I agree. With all that both of you said, I do think that I want to remind everyone that in Aruba, transitioning is possible, and that there are guidelines in place. Medical transition, let me say that specifically. There are guidelines. Yesterday, some specialists talked about this during a speech, and I think that it is important that people know that, only because simply not knowing that could already have an impact on somebody's life. Like Veer said, find the people that you can count on. Find the people that you trust, that you can have these conversations with. I am sure, Veer, that people can reach out to you
of course,
through social media. You have been so open, which
yes,
is awesome.
Please DM me.
Yes. Because like Veer said, maybe you'll talk to a friend or something who will be able to support you emotionally, but may still have no idea of what are the answers to your questions. Also, I want to tell everyone that if you don't know something, say that, and that's okay. Especially in these situations, like if somebody comes to you and they express that they have questions about transitioning or being trans, and you have no idea what to answer to that person, but you do know that there are resources out there where people can reach out, guide them through that and support them into going to those resources instead of maybe sharing possible misconceptions. I have heard people, for example, say that transitioning is not possible in urban. That is not true. So if you tell somebody who is asking for that and you are like their trusted person and they hear that, that can have an impact that we don't want. So if you don't know, say that. It is fine. Try to figure it out. If you can't, reach out to people that, probably do know or will be able to give you more information. For people out there that do not know what they can do because they are not part of the LGBTQIA plus community, I encourage you, because I'm not telling you that you have to, but I encourage you to be an ally. Simply because it will not take anything away from you, but it will give so much back to the people that need allies in their lives. You can be an ally as a friend, but you can be an ally as a company. You can be an ally as an NGO. Make the choice to be accepting and respectful of all human beings. I think that is something that we can all gain from. And like Bruce said, if you want to participate in Pride Month, I hope it is a wonderful one. If you choose not to participate in it, then I hope it's not too
Hot.
horrible or whatever for you, right? And honestly, I don't care. But I do hope that you learned something new today. That is the goal of Sincerely Carolina. And that you were able to hopefully make some behavioral changes in your life. I try to encourage that as well. So I do want to encourage you next time when somebody introduces themselves, maybe ask them if they would like to be called a particular way, if they have a name they go by, or if they would like to use different pronouns that the ones that you might assume because of their appearance. I think that this is a good practice of being inclusive, but also respecting the person and maybe helping somebody who's not necessarily open to be them true selves with you. So I want to leave you with that. Anything else before we go offline?
I think I'm good.
Yes?
Thank you for having us.
Exactly. I would like to thank Carolina to giving us an hour of your time on your show.
Anytime.
And specifically for the theme and the conversation we had today, I think it's very important. Visibility is key. I don't know how many followers are here, but they can see it tomorrow or next week. So thank you for addressing the issue.
Woohoo! Thank you so much. I do want to remind you all that in case you were unable to follow this whole conversation because you just got in your car, you just turned on the radio or saw the live on social media, that is okay. This episode will, remain on YouTube and on Facebook for you to rewatch, but it will also be available on streaming platforms like Spotify and podcasts. And share it with somebody. I hope that we'll learn something new and become better people because of that. So once again, I want to say thank you to you both for being here today. But I also want to say thank you to my awesome sponsors that allow me to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And today it was about transitioning. So thank you to Sarah V and thank you to Crass for being awesome. And of course, thank you to Girl Fam for allowing these conversations to happen on air and in Aruba. So thank you for that. I will see you again next week, and we will be talking about support for the LGBTQIA plus community in schools. So for those of you that are wondering about that particular topic, we will be here next week with that. Be nice and stay cool, y'all. Please do not, have heat exhaustion or whatever. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hi. Hi, I'm Carolina, and I am the host of Sincerely Carolina, a series of educational conversations about current social issues with local and international experts. Make sure you tune in every Saturday on Cool FM from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Bye!
Upgrade Boss Smile. Cook crust through